Ever since I saw Dr. Sleep, I've been very interested in checking out Mike Flanagan's other work. Now, for whatever reason, it took me until a few weeks ago to do that when I watched The Haunting of Hill House for the first time. Why did it take me so long? I have no idea, especially considering the fact that I love Dr. Sleep, I love horror in general, and I had heard nothing but great things about most of his other work, especially The Haunting of Hill House. But I finally got around to it, and guys, I have to tell you, this could very well be my favorite show of all time. At the very least, my favorite horror show and favorite short series of all time. Let's dive into why. This is your spoiler warning. Now, I call it a horror show, which it most certainly is. It definitely delivers on the horror, but calling it that almost feels like a disservice because there is so much more to this show than just the horror. Don't get me wrong, it absolutely delivers on the scares. The house itself is very creepy. Some of the ghosts are very creepy, especially Bent Neck Lady and the guy with the hat, and there are a few really good jump scares in there. One in particular with Ghost Nell in the car is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, jump scare of all time. That one really got me, and I do not scare easily. But as good as the scares are, it is so much more than that. The horror is almost secondary to the characters and the themes. I was not prepared for just how incredibly well written the story and characters would be, and just how emotional this show would be. From the first episode, they set up a very intriguing story that has tons of dangling plot threads and that we slowly get more pieces of as we go along, builds intrigue very well, posing some really interesting questions such as what happened to Olivia, what is Hugh hiding, what happened to Nell, what is up with the Dudleys, is the house truly haunted, how much of this is supernatural and how much of it is mental illness, leaving us constantly wondering where things are going to go, all the way up until the last episode. The story is told in non-linear fashion, something that Flanagan loves to do in a lot of his projects, and there is a purpose to all of that. It's a bit confusing and possibly even seemingly disjointed in the beginning, but it all comes together perfectly in the end. And by the time we get to the end, we learn that the timeline wasn't actually all that important. And it does all of this without compromising the internal logic. Every single character has their own struggles, their own issues that they need to overcome, and by the end of the show, they all do so in a way that feels very fleshed out and earned. The characters and their journeys and their relationships with each other are the beating heart of this show. Let's talk about the siblings from oldest to youngest. Steve is a character that for a vast majority of the show, I didn't particularly like, and I'm assuming that that was by design. Certainly the kid version of him that we get glimpses of is fairly likable, but the adult version is kind of an arrogant skeptic that was in denial of everything that happened in the house and after the house, blamed it all on mental illness, which, to be fair, was part of it, and you understand why he feels that way, but he is extremely mistrusting of everything and everyone around him and clearly does not want to believe any of these supernatural stories. But despite not being a believer, he cynically uses all of their stories to write his books and to make himself some money, which understandably sparked a lot of friction between the siblings, especially when some of them decided to take his money from the books and some of them decided not to. Nell confronting Steve while he was in the middle of a book reading was a very powerful scene. May not have been the best time for her to do that. However, you completely understand why she did and why she feels the way that she does. This was kind of in the middle of her spiral. Of course, Steve rejecting her call the day before she died was very heartbreaking. Steve's relationship with his father is incredibly strained. It was much better when he was a kid. They were pretty close. He was always willing to lend a helping hand. But ever since that night, when Hugh left Olivia at the house, Steve has resented him because he did not understand the situation. He was not there in the Red Room, and he believes that Hugh was feeding his siblings what were, in his mind, delusions about what transpired in the house and the supernatural elements. Of course, Steve gets proven wrong on all of this by the end, which was very satisfying. He needed to be humbled, and was. He almost loses his wife. He hides the fact that he got a vasectomy from his wife, which is extremely messed up, can definitely come across dickish at times. So this is a character that desperately needed redemption. He desperately needed to reconcile with his siblings, with his father, with his wife. He didn't have a single stable, healthy relationship in this show. And by the end, he sees what his dad experienced and finally comes around to being a believer and makes things right with his family and his wife. All of that felt completely earned to me. It's a character that you're supposed to not like for a vast majority of it, clearly setting him up for a redemption arc that they absolutely delivered on. Michael Huseman, I hope I said that right, and Paxton Singleton played the adult and kid versions of the characters respectively, and both did a really good job portraying the character at those two very different points in his life. Shirley, portrayed by Elizabeth Reeser as an adult, is probably the sibling that I have the least to say about. Interestingly enough, the two oldest siblings are by far and away my two least favorite. She is a character that, like Steve, throughout most of the show, I found very unlikable. She is self-righteous and controlling, constantly judging people, being a hypocrite, thinking that she is always right. She is incredibly stubborn. She insists on being the one to quote-unquote fix Nell after she dies, despite everyone around her and the audience saying that that is a horrible idea. And this stems from her past, of course, where she was so afraid of looking at her mother after she died, and that's why she decided to do the job that she did. However, she clearly cares about her family, and we see the kind of more nurturing side of her with the kid version played perfectly by Lulu Wilson. This show is cast perfectly all around, every single character, the kid versions of the siblings, the adult versions, the parents, the Dudleys, everyone was perfectly cast, and Shirley is no exception. The kid version was taking care of the kittens, which was a very heartfelt but also incredibly sad storyline. I love how every character gets these little subplots that can show off both their good or bad sides. They are all very complex. The tease of the random guy throughout the show that she keeps seeing, I thought was very interesting. Now, me personally, I was able to figure out pretty early on what that was about, what they were teasing. Not sure if everyone did. I'm not sure if it was supposed to be that obvious, and that doesn't take anything away from the show at all, because obviously we don't get the full story until the last episode, where we kind of flesh out what happened with that guy in the bar, and we find out why she's acting the way that she is towards her family, the fact that she freaks out on Theo and Kevin, and then by the end of the show finally confronts her guilt and apologizes to Kevin. By the way, Kevin is like the nicest guy in the world, one of the most likable characters in the show. Certainly doesn't get as well fleshed out as the siblings do, but someone that you come away with really enjoying his inclusion in the show. So she gets a really good arc as well. We finally realize why she feels the way that she does, why she's being such a hypocrite. She confronts it and makes things right, and you have to give massive respect to her for that. Another arc that is absolutely earned by the show. Another arc that could have felt shallow, but the incredible writing of the show makes it earned. I also think her relationship with Theo is particularly compelling. They were very close as kids. They had a shared experience where they were hearing the knocking all around their house when their father didn't. One of the scarier scenes in the show. They experienced knocking again when they were both adults and when their relationship was quite a bit more strained, which was caused mostly by a misunderstanding. But Shirley lets Theo live with her, and their relationship is ultimately repaired by the end of the show, which is nice because it is a very important one. Speaking of which, Theo is my personal favorite character in the show. She is very complex, and I'm a sucker for complex characters. She's definitely closed off and afraid to let people in, even physically touch them. She pushes Trish away, who seems like a very nice person and a good fit for her. And we, as an audience, are a bit put off by that at first because we don't know the full story. Once we do, we completely understand why she acts this way. She is quite literally someone who feels too much and is so afraid of feeling other people's pain and sorrow. It's an amazing but horrifying power. They set up the gloves thing very well. Another element that we're like, why is she doing that? It's very strange, seems very strange at first. Of course, as we realize what her power is, boy, do we feel stupid for judging her. I mentioned how every character has at least one, usually multiple, really interesting subplots that serve to flesh out their characters further. Hers is one of my favorite. When she goes to the house and she lays on the couch and realizes what this guy has been doing to these kids, and then she outs him and he admits to it right away. That was a very interesting subplot that, if it was in lesser hands, could have felt forced or tacked on or unnecessary. But it was a great inclusion in this show and was a great sequence for her character. Incredibly traumatizing for her. It's certainly an important action that she did, outing this guy, getting him arrested, but she doesn't like doing it because it makes her feel horrible. It traumatizes her, and you can see it on her face while she is feeling what happened to these kids. Her whole monologue explaining to Shirley what happened with Kevin, how she was numb and couldn't feel anything anymore and was so desperate to feel something that she was glad that she did it because she finally was able to feel again, is one of my favorite moments, possibly my favorite moment in the entire show, and another reason why she is my favorite character. The reveal that she felt nothing when touching Nell was fantastic and incredibly heartbreaking because at the time we assumed that she felt something absolutely horrifying. She felt Nell's death, and that's what made her react like that. But no, it was the fact that she felt nothing. That was a fantastic reveal that made us further understand why she does what she does. Of the actors that play the siblings at either age, McKenna Grace was the one who by far and away I was the most familiar with, and she is certainly fantastic as the kid version of this character, portraying all the complexities of her being very closed off and afraid to touch anyone physically, but clearly cares about her siblings and has their backs. She defends them from their parents when they get blamed for something they didn't do. She felt really, really bad when Luke got stuck in the basement, and when she loses Nell, when Nell disappears. Her first figuring out that she has the ability that she has to feel or sense things made for a really nice moment, a really nice conversation with her mother who shared that same ability. I had never heard of Kate Siegel before this, and now she is literally one of my favorite actors. Obviously, she plays the adult version of Theo. She's married to Mike Flanagan. She's in a bunch of his stuff, and I can't wait to see more of her as I explore more of his projects. But she is phenomenal at conveying all of these complex emotions perfectly that this character is constantly going through, making you feel for someone despite the fact that they're outwardly acting a little bit standoffish and maybe even mean at times. You know what's going on the inside, especially by the end of the show when she fully reveals everything. Now let's get to the twins, Luke and Nell, who have extremely tragic stories. Nell in particular, of course, given how it ends. The kid versions of them, played by Julian Hilliard and Violet McGraw, are absolutely adorable, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, which makes their stories all the more devastating because we see these kids knowing where they're going to end up, and it is gut-wrenching. They were both undoubtedly very traumatized by the Red Room experience, and they didn't even fully understand what happened there. And like Theo, they also have some sort of power. They have a twin connection, not just in the sense that twins do in real life, but like an actual physical feeling, a physical attachment they have to each other, even when they're far apart, which is, again, both amazing and terrifying, just like Theo's ability. It's like being an empath on steroids. There is a constant theme of neither of them being believed by their family. No one believed Luke about Abigail. No one believed Nell about the bent neck lady. No one believed Luke as an adult, played by Oliver Jackson-Cohen, that he was clean and sober, which, to be fair to them, is somewhat understandable given how many times he relapsed, how many times he stole from them and lied to them. But kicking a drug addiction, especially given everything he has gone through, is incredibly difficult, and he deserved all of the support that he could get. However, that's not to say that he didn't do some things that were less than ideal. Making Nell buy drugs for him was really not cool, and it was taking advantage of her. She is another character that is just way too nice and way too willing to lend a helping hand, even if she knows that it's going to harm them. She just cannot say no, especially given her twin connection to Luke. Another moment that I thought was really sad was Luke's friend bailing on him, possibly more than friend. They definitely hinted at that. But that was a moment that was really heartbreaking because you could tell that he did truly care about her as a person and wanted to help her and wanted to protect her. So when she runs off with his money, that was pretty devastating. The show brilliantly explores addiction with the character of Luke, what causes it and what it does to the people around you. He was clearly traumatized by the Red Room situation and the entire experience with the house in general, and that's what caused him to go down this very dangerous and destructive path, which caused him to lie to his family, to steal from his family, to continuously relapse. And it does a great job of showing the difficulty of getting over an addiction like that, especially given everything he had gone through. Another interesting aspect of Luke's character is that throughout the entire show, he is continuously drawn towards the afterlife by Olivia and continuously being told don't by Nell. And we don't know what that means until the very last episode when he has his kind of near afterlife moment, and it all comes to a head when he goes into the Red Room and we finally realize what that all meant. I find the Abigail story quite fascinating. It's another plot thread, another mystery that they set up early on in the show that goes in a way different direction than you were expecting. I, at least, expected her to just be a ghost the entire time, but the revelation that she was actually a real person and was the daughter of the Dudleys and was killed by Olivia and then became a ghost was just a wild twist that I never saw coming. Surely added to his trauma, as did being trapped in the basement, which is one of the scarier and more intense scenes in the entire show. That experience would no doubt scar a kid of that age for the rest of their life. Nell's story absolutely broke me. Legitimately one of the saddest storylines I have ever experienced in a movie or TV series. The bent neck lady was incredibly creepy and something that understandably traumatized her for life, and I love how the bent neck lady thing kind of comes full circle as we get to the end of her story. Having these traumatic experiences as a kid, constantly seeing the terrifying bent neck lady and being told that she isn't real, witnessing the death of another young girl around her age at the hands of her mother, her almost getting killed by her mother. Nell was probably too young to fully grasp what happened at the time, and she most likely suppressed the memory. Still, that is something that will change someone forever. Thinking she is past it as an adult, that she can finally move on with her life, finally get married. She does. She finds a great husband and lives a normal, happy life for a while, despite still feeling her brother's pain. The wedding itself was very happy. She had a big smile on her face. She was hanging out with her siblings, having a great time. It truly seemed for a while like things were going to be okay. Then she loses her husband in what was a total freak accident. Was it a freak accident? She thinks there was something else at play. However, I did a lot of Google searching and stuff, and it doesn't appear like that was the case. It appears like she was just really that unlucky, especially given the reveal that the bent neck lady was actually her the entire time. Just an insane tragedy, and that, or I guess seeing the bent neck lady again slightly prior to that, was the beginning of the end for her. She thought she was past all of this, but this started a chain reaction that ultimately led to her death. She's honestly the only character that never really did anything bad to her siblings, aside from, I guess I would say, forcing Theo to feel the bed and around the house and on the ground after her husband Arthur died. That was not cool, literally grabbing her hand and making her do it. Didn't love that, but you understand, again, why she's doing it. All of these characters, despite the fact that they may do some questionable or unethical things, given their experiences, you can understand why they're doing it. They declined her calls, which was an incredibly sad moment, knowing where it leads. Watching the whole bent neck lady storyline play out in episode 5, knowing how it's going to end, just gutted me. Then the added twist of her actually being the bent neck lady was mind-blowing, something that we never even thought about as the first few episodes of the show played out, despite the fact that we knew that she ended up dying and that it should be fairly obvious. Nothing that even crossed my mind. So that was a great reveal, bringing everything full circle in an incredibly tragic episode. I want to give a shout out to Victoria Pedretti, who is fantastic in this role, another actor who I had never heard of prior to this, and she is an absolute standout. Just brings that emotion and heart and tragedy to a character that is incredibly tragic. Hugh Crane is the father of the siblings in the show, played by Timothy Hutton and Henry Thomas to perfection. He is another very complex character, someone who, before we know the full story, we don't really like in the beginning of the show, and are given information about him that makes us believe that he made some questionable decisions, that he did not handle the whole situation very well. But as the show plays out, and especially as we get into the last episode, we understand why he did what he did. He kept everything hidden because, and I believe this is the line, I'm not 100% sure, some things you just need to live. He was hesitant to believe his kids, but believed when he saw for himself. And that's really all you can expect from a parent like that. I mean, given any parent in any situation like this, of course, they're not going to believe that their kids are seeing actual ghosts or anything like that until they see it for themselves. So he's a character who you're sort of told not to like in the beginning, but like more and more as the show goes along. He possibly could have talked to his kids more or hung out with them more, been more active in their lives. After the whole house incident, I think that is a real criticism that you can levy at him. But even that is something that he reconciles. At the end, he makes right and wants to be in their lives. Now, I'm not exactly sure how everyone else felt about this, but I thought that they were trying to convince us, at least for a portion of the show, that he may have actually killed Olivia, which, to be totally fair, at that point, would have been totally understandable. I think it would have been very similar to Wendy killing Jack in The Shining. She was no longer his wife. He had to do it. And when he was in the police station with all the blood on him, that was something that I wondered about. And that was another interesting plot thread, another interesting mystery that the show set up. And I would have been fine with it. I was fine either way. Ultimately, that was not the case, which I think does work, but it was certainly an interesting mystery that they set up. Olivia, who is the mother of the siblings in the show, is another very tragic character. She is essentially this show's Jack Torrance, especially the book version, who was a more likable guy before he got to the hotel, as opposed to in the movie where he's kind of already a creep. But she's a very loving mother who cares deeply about her family and about her husband, and is clearly a good person, but is corrupted by the house and by Poppy Hill, who is essentially the main villain of the story, a nefarious ghost who takes advantage of Olivia's love for her kids and manipulates her into trying to kill them in order to save them. So she is doing horrible things, but you totally understand why. Just like in The Shining, the house slowly breaks her and turns her into a monster. You understand why she does what she does, but also why she needs to be stopped and why Hugh left her at the house, which is something that his kids, especially Steve, hated him for a long time, but it was 100% the right move. She continues this goal in the afterlife, taking Nell and trying to take the others, and it's a very heartwarming and heartbreaking scene when Hugh agrees to let her take him instead, essentially sacrificing his own life in order to save his kids and let them live out their lives, which I thought was a perfect ending for both characters and was a really, really touching moment. Carla Gugino is fantastic in the role. I really like her as an actress. I think she is very underrated and underutilized, and Mike Flanagan sees that and recognizes her talent and utilizes her a lot and to the best of her ability, so kudos to him for that. I also want to make it clear that the similarities to The Shining are not a knock on the show whatsoever. Flanagan is clearly a super fan of The Shining. I mean, he directed the sequel to it, and the parallels are obvious, but I don't mean that in a bad way. They are definitely homages that he takes in his own interesting direction. I find the Dudleys, played by Robert Longstreet and Annabeth Gish, to be very compelling as well, and like everything and everyone in the show, they serve a purpose. It's kind of a mystery as to what that purpose is at first, and I feel like they kind of want us to believe that they can't be trusted. That's at least the way I felt as we were watching the first few episodes of the show, but as it goes along, we learn more things about them. We learn that they don't go to the house at night because of the experiences they've had. Fair enough. They hide their daughter from the world, and particularly from that house, which I think the show clearly frames as a bad thing, especially because she ends up dying anyway. So they weren't able to hide her. We also eventually find out why they stayed on and why Hugh kept the house, which was another very interesting mystery plot thread that was set up in the first episode. They wanted to stay with their ghost daughter, and Hugh made a deal with them. Completely understand all of that. So many great mysteries that are set up and questionable character decisions, at least decisions that seem like they're questionable at the time, but all of these get great answers by the end of the show. Everything comes together perfectly. Mr. Dudley in particular has one of the several great monologues in the show while him and Hugh are in the basement. They're also very religious, which the Cranes are not, making for a nice dichotomy there. We thought they may have been nefarious. Maybe they were up to something mysterious. Maybe they were trying to do something to the Cranes, but they turned out to be actually pretty good people. I think telling this story with the two timelines being side by side makes for a very nice dichotomy between the kid versions of the characters and the adult versions of the characters. I would say that with the exception of maybe Theo, all of these characters were better versions of themselves as kids, the more true versions of themselves. They have become bitter or broken or both by the time that they're adults, and we understand why. But after everything they go through, they eventually kind of circle back to becoming the better versions of themselves that they were as kids. And I think that it totally works given everything they went through. I've hinted at this a little bit, but I want to talk more about the ending. This is the ending that we deserved. It brought everything together perfectly, and this is a show that definitely could have suffered significantly if the ending was not as good as it was. If things fell apart, or if so many things were left dangling or not making sense, or if it wasn't emotionally as satisfying as it was. I think both thematically, logically, this ending works. Olivia does not want to let her kids go again. She has another chance to be able to, as she would say, wake them up. Obviously, what she really means by that is kill them so that they can be together. Can't let her do that, but you understand why she wants to. Hugh agreeing to stay with her so that the kids can live was a fantastic moment that I touched on earlier. Perfect ending for his character, showing Steve what happened so that Steve finally understands why Hugh made the decisions that he did, so that the audience finally understands why Hugh made the decisions that he did, why he kept things secret. Steve finally believing the Red Room being the heart or the stomach of the house. It was the dance studio, the toy room, the reading room, the game room, the family room, and the treehouse. I remember them saying before that there was never a treehouse, and the look on Steve's face like, wait a minute, there was definitely a treehouse. All of those rooms were actually just the Red Room, and that was an amazing reveal. And when they showed the montage of all of them kind of doing their own thing in there, that was perfect. Nell, once again, is the beating heart of this show, and everyone gets their closure with her. Man, this was a hugely emotional moment for me. Everyone apologizing to her, Nell just being the person that she is, forgives them. The revelation I alluded to before, which is that the timeline was never really that important. It was just about all of the moments they had together. I loved you completely and you love me the same. The rest is confetti. I could barely even say that line without breaking down. Luke refusing to die. There was a moment where we thought he was going to, and we have kind of a like Punisher, I am home, or Rocket in Guardians of the Galaxy 3 almost being dead, stepping a foot into the afterlife, but not quite getting there, wanting to keep on living, and Nell telling him don't. We finally realize what that was about, and then of course we see them celebrating his 2-year anniversary of being clean and sober, which was great. Steve finally reconciling with his wife. By the way, I thought that the opening of the last episode was great, and I was thoroughly confused at first because how is she pregnant? Why are they all okay again? But you slowly come to realize that this is a dream, and I thought that was so well done. All of their dreams were great, and then Nell waking them up. Just every single character got their payoff. Every single character completed their arc perfectly. Theo finally getting rid of her gloves, showing that she is not afraid to feel anymore, that she is letting her guard down, that she is now willing to let people in, and that she is finally willing to have an actual relationship. Perfect ending for that character. They all had their perfect ending. Not just every character, but every plot thread and every theme was wrapped up perfectly. Between the incredible character development and character arcs, the perfect casting all around, from the kid versions of the characters to the adult versions, to the parents, to the Dudleys, the intricate story that is constantly keeping you guessing and sets up and pays off every single storyline perfectly while maintaining its horror roots with some great scares, some great ghosts, some fantastic jump scares, tackling deep and important themes through story such as guilt, addiction, fear, trauma, depression, sacrifice, and most importantly, love. Doing all of that without compromising the internal logic or the overall storytelling, something that Flanagan absolutely excels at. Even the long monologues that in lesser hands would be boring are interesting because of how well written and well directed it is. This is definitely one of my favorite shows of all time, if not my absolute favorite. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment with your thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House, and stay tuned for some more horror content.